after those dramatic and astounding developments, the armed insurrection against the Russian state, followed by a volte-face by the Wagner paramilitary group's chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, Russia's Federal Security Service has now said it will drop the case against Wagner. Earlier, these men had been labeled as traitors by Russian President Vladimir Putin. In an event that sent shockwaves through Russia and the world, Wagner fighters, led by Prigozhin, a close ally of Putin till not long ago, staged an attempted rebellion on Saturday, one that clearly threatened President Vladimir Putin's grip on power and posed the greatest challenge to the Russian president's 25-year reign. Hours later, Prigozhin halted his march on Moscow and said he did not want to spill Russian blood and was therefore retreating. Today's statement, issued by the Russian government, does not mention the Wagner boss by name. The group has been asked to hand over its heavy military equipment to the Russian military. Prigozhin claims the mutiny was not an attempt to overthrow Putin, but a protest against the Russian government's plans to shut down his mercenary group. He also claims that his troops' uprising was a masterclass in how the Ukraine invasion should have been and demonstrated major flaws in Russia's battle plan as far as Ukraine is concerned. Reports say the Wagner chief is now in Belarus. Remember, it was the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko who brokered peace and got Prigozhin to end his mutiny. But while the rebellion may have been quelled, most observers believe it has left the Russian president significantly weaker and diminished. Hoping to scotch such commentary, the Kremlin has issued a statement claiming Vladimir Putin's position is unshaken. There is a lot of unnecessary hysteria on this issue from pseudo-specialists. The Kremlin also claims it has no information on the whereabouts of Yevgeny Prigozhin. Under the terms of the deal that ended the mutiny, Prigozhin was to be allowed to move to Belarus, and his fighters were given the chance to either join Russia's regular armed forces or move to Belarus. Predictably, Putin has insinuated that the West was behind the armed insurrection, saying the West wants Russians to kill each other. US President Joe Biden has issued a denial, saying the US and NATO had nothing to do with it. The question we're asking is this: where does Prigozhin's mutiny leave Putin? He may have succeeded in quelling the rebellion, but it has seriously dented his image of a strong man both at home and abroad. Hasn't the Russian president's authority been significantly diminished? Will the Wagner revolt impact the Ukraine war? After all, the Wagner group fought by the side of the Russian military for a long time in Ukraine and was even instrumental in the fall of Bakhmut. Additionally, their mutiny has exposed many vulnerabilities in Russia's security and military forces. How does the West view these developments? Are Ukraine and the West in a position to exploit the chink in Putin's armor? Is Vladimir Putin a much weaker leader today, or will he manage to bounce back and once again stamp his undisputed authority on Russia? All right, let's now go across to Ambassador Prabhat Prakash Shukla, former Indian ambassador to Russia, to understand the ramifications of the developments that unfolded in that country over the weekend. Ambassador Shukla, the biggest question before us at the moment is this: where does this mutiny leave President Putin? There are many who believe that while he may have succeeded in quelling the rebellion, fact of the matter is that he looks significantly weaker and diminished in the aftermath of this mutiny. He was comprehensively outmaneuvered by the Wagner boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin. For a full day, he looked like he was simply not in control of his country, and there seemed to be anarchy. Where do you think Putin goes from here?
Well, let me just clarify that I was ambassador in Moscow, and I have also been the ambassador to Ukraine. So I guess I get a slightly different perspective on these things. Where is President Putin now as a result? Look, one thing I have learned over the last 2 decades is never to underestimate Putin's ability to bounce back. Truly, he has never faced a challenge of this nature. Sorry, but it's too early to say that this has definitively weakened him. What it has certainly done is to expose divisions at the very top of the Russian leadership. For my money, I am firstly a little surprised that the FSB, for example, did not see this coming. Or if they saw it coming, they perhaps did not inform President Putin. Whichever way you want to chop it, it is surprising that they were unable to see this coming and maybe take preventive action preemptively in advance. Now, the other thing which some newspapers in Russia are reporting is also this, that actually when Prigozhin entered Rostov, his actual intention was to meet Shoigu and Gerasimov, respectively the defense minister and the chief of general staff, who were there. But they did not apparently wait for him, and they flew off to Moscow. And according to these newspaper reports, they gave a false report to President Putin, who then declared that this was a mutiny and drew the parallel, which frankly surprised me too, to 1917. Now, it's worth pausing a while to think about what President Putin was thinking when he mentioned 1917. You see, two things happened. One of them, which Putin confronted in his own remarks, which was that the state system was overthrown and that he would not permit that to happen. Okay, he seems to have achieved that. But as a kind of precursor to the overthrow of the state system in February 1917, old style, March 1917, new style, as Lenin put it afterwards, the soldiers voted with their feet. The soldiers deserted en masse. Now, of course, nobody is addressing this point, but it is a very important one, because the war has not been going very well for Russia, and really the effective fighting has been done by two non-regular forces. We talk about Wagner, and they have done a pretty good job of fighting for places like Artyomsk, which in India is called Bakhmut. And the other is the Chechens. And it struck me that this time the Chechens spoke very strongly in favor of President Putin and were actually heading to Rostov to confront the Wagner group. One other point that is worth noting is that Prigozhin was welcomed in Rostov, not only by the civilian population, but even by the military forces there.
There was zero resistance.
Zero resistance. And in fact, they not only waltzed into the supreme headquarters in Rostov, but they also came to within 200 kilometers of Moscow without any significant opposition from the ground forces. Yes, there were some attacks from the Air Force, and the Wagner forces killed 12 pilots. This President Putin has admitted. So, it exposes some very concerning dissensions within what are called the Siloviki. And in fact, if you read today's Pravda report, now this is not the old Pravda, of course, they're not a party organ, but they have very close links with the ruling party. And they have painted a very bleak picture of how the meeting went between President Putin and the Siloviki. I hope your audience knows what the Siloviki are. They are basically the law enforcement and the coercive authority of the government. So Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, the special services, and so on. They are called the Siloviki. And according to some newspaper reports from Russia, the meeting was a fairly tough one, and Putin did some plain speaking. And there is anticipation that some heads will have to roll within the top echelons of the Russian Siloviki and military leadership.
Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad, what happened on Saturday in Russia sent shockwaves not just in Russia but throughout the world. The biggest question before us today is simply this, sir. Where does this mutiny leave President Putin? Yes, he's managed to quell the rebellion. Prigozhin may have fled to Belarus. But fact of the matter is that most see this as the biggest challenge to Putin in his 25-year reign, not to mention an embarrassment or perhaps a humiliation both at home and internationally. What do you think this really means for Putin?
Absolutely correct. It's a big blow to Putin's authority. Not really a blow onto his authority, but also a blow on his KGB, the intelligence organization, and the entire machinery that he commands today. Let us look at. I've been hearing what the Ambassador Shukla was saying, and most of it I agree with him. I don't want to repeat what he said, except one little point which I'll come in the end about the nuclear aspect. But what must be, you see, look at the whole thing in totality now. What has been the state of affairs of this entire operation over the last 15 months? And that will lead us to some of the answers as to why what has happened has happened. When an operation in the current world, this is not the First World War era, this is not the Second World War era. This is the era of modern times, the connectivity in the world, the modernization, the technological development, the kind of facilities human beings have today have vastly changed from what they were in the Second World War. So today you cannot have prolonged war of 15 months where the entire population has been uprooted. People are getting killed for the last 15 months, both sides. So one of the biggest mistakes President Putin made to start with is to violate the principles of war. The principles of war say you must have an aim and you must put full might to achieve that aim and objective, which I'm afraid President Putin did not do for reasons best known to him, but perhaps he did not want to cause massive destruction as would have happened if he had used massive firepower and massive forces. So that is one big mistake he made. The second, there has been a poor assessment, a poor analysis, a poor result of his intelligence. That has let him down terribly, not from the start of the war till even yesterday, the day before yesterday, when he couldn't see what is brewing inside the Wagner army. That's the second big failure, and I think the KGB will have to answer it. The third big important thing is this, which is now the answering to your question, that has it made Putin any weaker? Yes, in some ways, yes. But in some ways, it's going to make him more aggressive. In some ways, I think that what he's been restraining till now, he will unleash. He will be pricked badly now. He thinks that everybody in the world is going to laugh at him and say, oh, Putin was a great guy, but Putin is no longer, he's like a mouse now. Wagner was going to overthrow him. Now, first point first, what happened to the Wagners? You asked this question to Ambassador Shukla and he answered it, that there were many reasons. But one of the reasons which I wanted to add of what he said was there has been a battle fatigue. Now, battle fatigue of the Wagners is more important and more realism than what it is to the regular army. The Wagners have poor logistics, comparatively poorer logistic support, comparatively poor pay and allowances, comparatively other facilities that a regular army gets. Therefore, there was a tremendous amount of fatigue that has set in over the last 15 months, even though they have captured Bakhmut after great sacrifices, which is a great military action they've done. So that is what the bigger mind, in the minds of the soldiers of Wagner, and therefore the leader thought that he can catch on it and put pressure. So he wanted to put pressure on the military hierarchy and the Ministry of Defense in Russia, which he thought Putin will succumb to and do whatever he wanted to do to bring them down or to change them or whatever, admonish them, which did not happen. And it cannot happen so easily also because in the middle of the war, you don't go on changing your finance ministers, your defense ministers, and your army chiefs and the field commander, even though some field commanders were removed for inefficiency and for poor performance during the war. So having looked at all of this, now what is going to happen to the leader of Wagner? What is the future of Wagner? Let's look at that first. What is going to happen to the leader? He has annoyed Putin. He has annoyed Putin no end. Putin is not the guy who's going to spare him. You have last seen him on Sunday or a Monday. I do not know when you will ever see him again.
In fact,
Whether
I
he's in
asked the
Belarus-
ambassador this question. Is he a dead man walking? President Putin is not known to tolerate opponents. He's certainly not known to forgive his enemies. And this
Yeah,
man is today his
That's
enemy
exactly
number
what
one.
I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. The last picture of him you saw was an SUV waving out.
Yeah.
That will perhaps be the last picture you ever seen. Please keep it framed in your channel. You will never see that again. Putin is not going to let him go. Second point. Now, people in the West think, the NATO thinks that Putin has become weaker and therefore Ukrainian army will be able to launch more aggressive counterattacks and the battle will swing in favor of Russia. I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to it. Putin is going to go stronger. Putin has said, right, guys, I've been a little ease on you. I haven't used all my firepower. As Ambassador also said, he hasn't used his full potential of the Air Force. He hasn't used the full potential of his missile technology and of his artillery and many other weapon systems that he has got. He's only be using a small number. One artillery fire there, one MRSS fire there, one drone there, one. This is not how a concentration of force is applied when you want to achieve results in a tactical battle. You have to en masse use artillery fire. You have to en masse use the multi-barrel rocket launches. You have to support it with serious air effort. You have to support it with serious tank effort. All of that combined together makes an operation successful, which has not been done so far. It is not that the Russians don't know. It is not that the Russian army is not trained to do this, but it's just been restraining. And therefore, I see very soon a major escalation while the Ukrainians will do what they want to do and they'll continue to do these nibbling attacks as what they call as counter-attacks. which
Okay,
are
I
not going
don't
to
doubt,
sustain
sir,
very
that
much.
there will be an escalation, but I'm surprised you believe that Putin has not given this war his all already. Because remember, here's a man who said this war would be over in 2 weeks, and here
Yes,
we are,
yes, and
more
that is
than a
where
year
he's made a
later,
mistake.
still
That's
talking
the
about the
mistake.
war. Yes,
No, but that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
That the war should not have lasted more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It has
that's
lasted
what
15
Putin had
months.
said, and now it's lasted well over a year. And clearly, things haven't particularly gone Putin's way either.
Because he has not followed the principles of war.
He hasn't
Because he has
followed the
not followed
principles of war.
principles of war.
And in fact, Prigozhin had been bickering with the defense minister over the battle plans and the war tactics that were deployed by the Russian military in Ukraine. He had serious difference of opinion with the defense minister over that. But it's interesting you say that it wasn't just the fact that Prigozhin wanted to see the back of the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. Perhaps a certain amount of fatigue had set in for his troops, and that may have also been a trigger for this mutiny. Wing Commander Praful Bakshi, come in here, sir. You know, there is no doubt that Putin has been humiliated by this mutiny, carried out by a man who was one of his closest ally till not too long ago, also known as Putin's chef. Not to mention, as Lieutenant General Shankar Prasad said, this is also, a huge intelligence failure. And KGB has a lot to answer for. But do you agree with those who say that Putin today is a significantly weakened and diminished leader who may have, at least for a little while, lost his grip on Russia? Or are we talking about a wounded tiger who is sure to strike back, and the only way Putin can do that right now is by doubling down on his offensive against Ukraine?
Thank you very much for giving me a chance. Let me tell you, ma'am, it's a fact is this, that Putin left a lot to be done by his commanders whom he trusted. You see, a head of the state does not go to the ops room and keep watching the battle plan every time. And he saw that his grade B, the forces which he had deployed, He thought probably the things would be over. That's a miscalculation on his part. There's no doubt about it. Failure of intelligence. But the execution of the operations were also at fault, which he realized after some grave mistakes were done. 24-kilometer long tank column left alone to burn the air attacks, etc. All those things we will not repeat. The question, as General Saab had brought out, yes, principle of war, selection and maintenance of aim, concentration of force, yes, they were ignored. But the question is, Putin then realized that he has made a lot of mistakes and a number of senior commanders have been sacked. There is also doubt. And now, as you use the word, the wounded tiger, yes, he's a wounded tiger, humiliated, all right, because the bad press has given him all the name. So that he'll sustain. Yes, health-wise, I also know he's down, but that health was earlier playing on him. And his political situation was weak before the whole war started 2 years back. So that also is there. But now Putin is going to get into a very serious operation. He is not going to let anybody get out, especially our Wagner group leader, Prigozhin. Now, the Prigozhin will get shelter from Belarus for a number of time. Belarus is also a friend to Putin, also a friend to him. Yes, they will get it. But the question why must bring out, Prighozhin was angry on number of accounts. Their internal accounts was dealing with finances. I will not talk of that. But basically, when he said, I am fighting for Russia, though I am a mercenary, incidentally, he is a very successful mercenary. And mercenaries came from 60s onwards. Colonel Mad Mike Hoare and all their names, you must be knowing, in Africa, etc. He operated there. He was very successful. He said, if I have given so much to my motherland, at least I must get a recognition. Let me tell you, had he been caught or if the Wagner group get caught in the war, they don't get the POW status. They're tried like criminals who was against the state in a civil court. That is what happens to the people who like mercenary. So now he said, I have done so much. When he found he will not even get that and he will not get what he wanted, he fell afoul. They fell apart for various reasons, and I'm not. But he was, when he found that Putin has put him on the list of treachery against the nation, etc., that Putin had to take back because of Belarus. And that is why they said Slav blood is being shed. Same church, same religion, same language, the same DNA. How can you have, an entire Western world, especially NATO, watching and laughing all the way to the bank?
So you are saying that he was right when he said that he was retreating. He halted his march on Moscow because he indeed did not want to spill Russian blood, and that the point of this mutiny was not to overthrow Putin. It wasn't to have a coup, but to send out a message to the Russian military.